Hey, Intro to Criminal Justice, CJ 1100 students. So this week we're getting into law enforcement and policing more generally. And so one of the things you're going to do this week is you're going to read the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, which is created by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. The International Association of Chiefs of Police, IACP, put forth this document. These are the most educated officers in the United States. These are your police chiefs from around the country. They typically have high advanced degrees, master's degrees, etc., from different universities. But look, this document is meant to be the ideal. So if you're going to become a police officer, this is what you will strive to be. It doesn't mean that you necessarily can do it or do it all the time, but this is the type of police officer that you would want to be. Okay, so you're going to be reading this document and summarizing these roles. You're also going to be watching a video I'm going to try to post, as well as reading an article about alleged racial bias in police use of force, which is what's in the news right now, with the untimely death of a civilian caught on camera at the hands of Minneapolis police. That officer has been charged with third-degree murder as of this particular moment, and is facing up to like 25 years in prison. And there's protests, peaceful protests, riots, all kinds of stuff going on around the country as a result, right? So we're going to try to be really dispassionate, and we're going to try to be objective, neutral. I'm not going to take a stand on any of this, okay? But I do want you to try to think critically about this for this unit. So I'm going to start off by reading this document, the introductory paragraph, and I'll tell you why that's important in just a minute. Here's how it starts. As a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve the community, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all to liberty, equality, and justice. Now, it's from that document, from that paragraph, that we get 5 roles of policing. You take a policing class, you might learn about 3 roles or 2 roles, doesn't really matter. The point is there's 5 things stated there, and from that, scholars will pull out 5 different roles. Now, these roles are what we expect police to do ideally. Okay, so let's go through them. The first is law enforcement. It even says Law Enforcement Code of Ethics and as a law enforcement officer. But law enforcement is just one of the 5 things they do. Law enforcement means simply enforcing the law. So this is responding to a call for service about a crime, arresting a suspect, collecting evidence, presenting evidence at court to assist the prosecutor. All of this is enforcing the law. Pulling over speeders is law enforcement. Okay, so this is this is what we think of when we think of police officers, is that they enforce the law. That's true, but it's only one of the things they do. They also serve the role of crime preventer. Just by being present in a community, police prevent crime, because generally speaking, people that break the law don't want to do it in front of a cop because they don't want to get caught, right? So, but we also have crime prevention programs like DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education, which historically does not work. But the point is, having police in a school serves a crime prevention function. Teaching children about the dangers of drugs maybe has some kind of crime prevention impact, at least ideally, right? Police patrols, we have directed patrols at high crime areas, at hotspots of crime that are found to have an impact on the crime rate. So just being there is a crime prevention effect. So that's 2, law enforcement, crime prevention. The third one is peace preserver. Now this is interesting because police also intervene in non-criminal conduct as a way to serve us and to prevent crime. So the peace preserver role is like, let's say your neighbors are having a loud party. Too loud, your kids can't sleep, whatever. Call the police break up the party. They're preserving the peace. You have police officers at concerts. You have police officers at sporting events, football games, etc. They're there to preserve the peace, to keep things peaceful. So that's the third role that they play. Okay, and they're basically intervening in non-criminal conduct in situations where we can't seem to handle ourselves, particularly under the influence of alcohol. So they're there to preserve the peace. Okay, that's 3. The fourth one is probably the most important, because police spend most of their time in this particular role. It's called the service provider. Police provide services to people all the time. As a police officer, you'll spend most of your time providing services and being engaged in routine administrative tasks, as well as writing reports and things like that. Okay, so think about the kinds of services that police provide for us. Number 1, they respond to domestic violence call. First thing they do is they separate the two people who are involved in it. If there's two, they get their stories. They find out which one's the alleged aggressor. If there's probable cause of a domestic violence incident of violence, they will take that suspect and arrest him. They're required if they have probable cause that an incident happened. If it's not clear, they might separate the people. That's a service. But beyond that, they'll talk to the victim and say, hey, have you ever thought about talking to somebody? There's counselors in the area. Here's a number. Here's a domestic violence shelter. Here's a number. Why don't you call them? This is a service they provide. But for you and I as well, if we lock our keys out of our car, they might help us get our keys. If we lose our child, if we lose a pet, if we lose an elderly parent, there is often a call by the police to search for that person. This is a service. My wife at the time, divorced, but she was driving our kids in her minivan and got stuck in a bunch of mud. A police officer, Watauga County Sheriff's deputy, drove by, saw her, got under the car in his uniform and helped her get out of the mud. Got all muddy and everything. This is a service that police provide to us, okay? So, law enforcer, peace preserver, crime preventer, service provider, okay? Now, what's the fifth one? The last part of that document, the last part of the first paragraph. Respect the constitutional rights of all to liberty, equality, and justice. Now, think about this. You might think that requiring the police to protect your constitutional rights might run counter or be contrary to their effort of enforcing the law. So in other words, as a law enforcer, they want to catch the bad guy, right? That's the way they phrase it. But they're also simultaneously required to protect that person's constitutional rights. That seems contradictory, right? Yes, it is in some ways. But see, here's the thing. If you think about policing in the ideal world, we want American police to not be overzealous or do things that we don't like. We want them to protect our rights and to make sure that we are free. And so we have constitutional protection. So yeah, they want to get the bad guy, but they want to get the bad guy the right way. So here's some examples. When you're arrested or an arrest is imminent, the police are required to read you your Miranda warnings. What are your Miranda warnings? You are reminded of the right to remain silent. Anything that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. That's the Fifth Amendment. You have the right not to incriminate yourself. They remind you that you have a right to an attorney, and if you can't afford an attorney, then one will be provided to you. That's the Sixth Amendment. So these came from the case of Miranda versus Arizona in 1961, where this guy Ernesto Miranda was arrested, and the police didn't tell him he had the right not to incriminate himself. So when he did, he appealed it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you've got to let him know what his rights are so he doesn't violate them. So now, yeah, this basically makes it harder to convict someone of a crime, right? There's all these rules that police have to follow. And so in some ways it interferes with the law enforcement goal. But remember, we don't want to just catch people. We want to catch the right people, and we want their convictions to be upheld. So that's what that refers to. So you may have heard of the exclusionary rule from the case of Mapp versus Ohio in 1961, 1966. Look it up. Sorry, I'm not perfect. And that's what Google's for, right? But both of these cases came in the 1960s by the Supreme Court during the Earl Warren Court. The Warren Court is considered pretty liberal or protective of constitutional rights. And these cases in the 1960s, sorry, the dates sometimes run together, particularly if I'm doing it without notes, which I am. But the case dealt with the police going to the wrong address and getting evidence about some crime. And since they didn't have a right to be there, basically the evidence was considered illegally seized because you have a right to privacy in your home under the Fourth Amendment. Police have to have a warrant to establish this probable cause in order to come into your home or to seize property. So they didn't have that, so the evidence was thrown out. That's the exclusionary rule. Doesn't mean we want guilty people to go free. We just want to make sure that we're convicting them while respecting their constitutional rights. Now, what's interesting is that anything that they learned from that evidence also can't be used against you. So the original evidence that's excluded is called the poisonous tree, okay, a legal term for it. Anything that's learned from that is called the fruit of the poisonous tree. It's also not admissible. So for example, let's say the police pull someone over They don't have probable cause to search their car. They ask the person for consent. If you consent, then that gives them the right. And anything they find can be used against it. But you say, no, I'm not going to consent to you searching my car. But they search it anyway without probable cause. And they can't convince a judge that they had probable cause. And inside, they find a note. That note talks about the 5 people that the driver has killed and where their bodies are. That note cannot be used against that person. Neither can the bodies. The bodies are found because of the note, then that's the fruit of the poisonous tree. The note is the poisonous tree. The bodies are the fruit of the poisonous tree. Now, don't freak out. The bodies can be used against you if they're found through some other way. So the police can, there's something called inevitable discovery. If they could argue to a court that they would have discovered the bodies anyway, then that's called inevitable discovery. And then the bodies can be used against the person, okay? But I'm just trying to explain to you that the police are there also to protect your constitutional rights, even if that sometimes conflicts with the law enforcement role. Okay, so those are the 5 things that we expect of American police officers. Most police work at the local level of government. Most police work for cities and counties. It's roughly 75% of all police officers work for local governments. So your typical police officer works for a local police department, say Boone Police Department, Watauga County Sheriffs, etc. That's your typical cop. Their focus is almost exclusively on street crime. They're focused on basically crimes of the middle class and crimes of the poor. So they're not focused on white collar crime. They're not focused on corporate crime, even though that stuff kills more people, does more damage, leads to more property loss. That's not the focus. That's the focus of the FBI, state police agencies, etc. Okay, that's a little bit beyond our class. But here's why I bring that up. Police are focused on some relatively minor things. So this individual in Minneapolis that was recently killed when a police officer put his knee to the back of his neck for something like 8 or 9 minutes. And the man complained about not being able to breathe, and then he eventually passed out and died, right? He was suspected of forgery, like faking or pretending to be someone else, or writing his name on a check that didn't belong to him or whatever. Relatively minor thing. This is not like a murderer or a rapist or a robber or something like that. And he died. Well, a group of people on Wall Street and big banks committed widespread fraud in 2008 that led to the collapse of the U.S. economy. And this cost, based on estimates, between 12 and 22 trillion dollars. That's how much we lost as a result of this fraud, okay? Now, street crime, property street crime, cost Americans about $16 billion a year. That's according to the FBI. These are direct losses. It's about $16 billion a year. Well, when you, I don't know if you're very good at math, but if you compare these two and contrast these two, 12 to 22 trillion dollars divided by 16 billion comes out to be between 600 and 1100 years of street crime. So in other words, the fraud on Wall Street and big banks cost us between 600 and 1100 years worth of street crime. None of those people were pulled out on the street and had their police officer's knee put into their neck and were killed. And also, none of them were arrested either, not even arrested or convicted or sent to prison. So that's why some people are, partially upset about this very, very violent reaction to a relatively minor crime. Okay. Now, if the man resisted arrest, then police are allowed to use force to maintain control over someone, but they're not allowed to use lethal force unless the person poses a lethal threat to the officer or the community. So that's why this particular death has led to such outrage, because it was caught on camera and this man was helpless and he was in handcuffs. And police officers saying and police officials saying there's never ever a reason to put the neck to the back of the knee to the back of the neck of a man. Put it on his back, absolutely, but not his neck. So we'll let the courts settle this, okay? I'm not going to take a stance. I don't expect you to either. Now, take these 5 roles. The majority of time police spend on service providing and administrative tasks, okay? Not law enforcement. That's the stereotype. If you want to be a cop, you think you'll be out there busting heads and arresting people. You might in a big city, but otherwise you're probably going to be a relatively boring job, okay? Still important, of course. But look, go on down in the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics and read on things like, I will maintain courageous calm in the face of danger, scorn or ridicule. I will develop self-restraint, control. I'll be constantly mindful of the welfare of others, on and on and on. You read this now, you're going to compare that with some research about racial bias, because it goes on and talk about, I will never act officiously or permit personal feelings, prejudices, political beliefs, aspirations, animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions. Talks about never ever being biased, being wearing a badge as a symbol of public faith, on and on and on. Compare that with the alleged racial biases, or at least differences, disparities in terms of use of force and lethal use of force. Then I'm going to post this video, and you're going to see police officers acting very, very violently and aggressively, and they're saying things that sound like they're taking it personally, like it's about them and you not respecting their authority, so they pummel you. This is not consistent, whether you support it or not. It's not consistent with the law enforcement code of ethics. It's not how police are supposed to behave. Now, you might still support it. That's your business. But it's not, what I'm saying is it's not consistent with how they're supposed to behave. So the realities of policing don't often match, or sometimes don't match the ideals. All right. Now, that's a quick introduction to the basics of policing in terms of what police are supposed to do. From this, you have the 2 assignments. If you have any questions, please reach out to me via email. Use the forum as well. I'm also happy to Zoom with you. I've done that with a few students as well, to explain or to answer questions. So just let me know, and we'll have more soon. Keep well. Now we have to worry about this virus that is reemerging. Never went away, but it's, people are not social distancing. It's going to come back even worse, probably. But now we're dealing with really violent protests and anger towards the police. So y'all stay safe, okay? And yeah, just it's upsetting to me as someone who studies this for a living. So stay calm, stay safe, and do your work. Let me know if you have questions.